Well, in the STEP Centre, we're arguing that the post-2015 framework requires an ambitious and unified set of pathways for development that work across North and South and align development with objectives of environmental sustainability and social justice. And that, in turn, creates an imperative to think really hard about the directions of development, to move beyond static goals, to think about the pathways that development is taking, to think about the diversity of those pathways so that they can be attuned to the particular context for different groups of people in different parts of the world, and to think about the distributional consequences of different kinds of pathways, who's gaining and who's losing.
How should research and knowledge shape post-2015 development? I think by what it studies and how it studies. So I think the what, we need to really push forward on understanding the power and politics of development and not get too hung up on the numbers. If we need to sort of find a way to sprinkle magic dust on development and expose, make visible all this interplay of power which is actually determining which communities thrive and which don't. So I think the first thing is let's get more deeply into power and politics. And one way to do that is to think much more about history. I don't think we do nearly enough to recover the lessons of history. We allow the bad guys to rewrite history in the most outrageous way. And I think the kind of work of people like Ha-Joon Chang and Danny Roderick really shows us how rich history can be in terms of giving us a lot of different lessons about the way forward. In terms of how we do that, it strikes me that one of the things we're bad at is real-time research. So something happens, the journalists come, swarm around for a few days, then leave, and then the PhDs arrive 3 years later. But actually what policymakers want is somebody who's actually doing rigorous work in that 3-year gap, where we're actually with communities monitoring how food prices affect them, how shifts in norms affect them, how new legislation affects them. We need to get much better at telling that real-time story, and I think that's a research exercise Oxfam certainly wants to do a lot more of.
I think it's a really important question, and I think one of the most important things that research and knowledge can do is to look at the experience of the existing Millennium Development Goals and ask how far have they actually changed and shaped behaviour. The point of a post-2015 framework, to my mind, is to get better development than would otherwise be the case. And we need to understand better how setting goals and targets in this way does or doesn't change behaviour. And as I see it, when we look forward, we've got to have a framework which is influential, not so much in aid, though aid will remain a significant component, but is particularly significant in how domestic resources are allocated, because domestic resources are very much more important than aid and will be even more so over a 15 to 20 year timescale. The other thing that I think could be very valuable is to look more at how you get greater ownership by countries of these any goals and targets in a new framework. I think it's fair to say the Millennium Development Goals were too much made in New York and too much delivered to the rest of the world. I think it's much better to make them part of a genuine local political process where countries decide how ambitious they want to be and then take really serious steps to allocate their resources in a way that is likely to achieve those goals.
I believe that the private sector can be involved in shaping the post-2015 development agenda, and that there are ways to integrate the private sector into accomplishing the Millennium Development Goals. There are both indirect and direct ways of doing that. Some indirect ways include helping the enabling environment with good governance and taxes. A more direct way is having corporations integrate the Millennium Development Goals into their strategies. There is also a lot of research to be done in terms of measuring impact and understanding the best ways that the private sector can help accomplish the MDGs. Another important aspect of involving the private sector in accomplishing the MDGs is helping to build local capacities, and that may involve having the private sector work with organizations that help them engage with local NGOs and other local organizations.
After 2015, we need to be thinking in particular about the problems of climate change, how it will affect everyday life for every single person on this earth. But of course, for IDS perspective, this means especially the needs of poor people in countries which are going to be affected worse by climate change. And not just disasters, the extreme events. We're talking about how simple changes in temperature and rainfall, and when rainfall comes, is going to affect their ability to have viable livelihoods. So we have to prevent more poverty arising from climate change. Now, the research that we need for this, a lot of it is new, but we can also rediscover existing knowledge and use it in relation to adaptation for climate change. For example, on land tenure, this is an area of work which used to be more fashionable, but it needs to be used now because, for example, hardly anyone is looking at what a landless labourer's family does in South Asia in relation to climate change. A lot is going on about agriculture, but how do you do that adaptation if you are entirely landless? And in South Asia, you have between 40 and 60% of the people are landless.
Well, when thinking about how development is going to be conceptualized beyond 2015, I think we cannot ignore the role of the rising powers, these countries that sometimes they are grouped under the BRICS label, Brazil, Russia, China, India, and South Africa, or sometimes they're just called emerging powers, and then they include Vietnam, Indonesia, and others, because they are really developing into important actors for investment in low-income countries, for aid sometimes in these countries, and also as role models because they have experienced such rapid economic growth, also innovations in societal technologies such as welfare, cash transfers like the ones that come from several countries in Latin America. So all this modeling and also being actors that are having an influence in low-income countries, it's something that is going to shape the way we conceive development. It's going to challenge our conceptions of development beyond 2015.
I think that research needs to emphasise the social dimensions of development and be as inclusive as possible, including the human face and diverse voices of real people who are experiencing poverty, and to move away from a kind of high-level economic model of development that just sees people as units of productivity. It needs to see women's role in shaping development, not just women as people who can promote economic growth, who can add to the economy.